Today it's time to actually split our bamboo and get down to the business of making our fly rod. If you're new to the series, welcome. My name is Carl, and I'm going to be showing you how to make a 7.5 foot 4-weight fly rod out of bamboo. If this process is interesting to you or you want to follow along and make a rod, please subscribe to the channel and hit that little bell to be notified when I upload new videos. I'm going to be breaking this part into two parts. In part one, we're going to take both the butt and tip halves of the culm and splitting each of those into 6 sections. In part two, we're going to take those sections and split them down to the sizes we need before we begin our rough planing. While splitting bamboo isn't the most technically challenging part of making a fly rod, there are some things that can go wrong. And when they do, you can make a little bit of a mess. The first culm I ever split ended up mostly in a pile of splinters that were totally unusable. I really want to help you avoid that. So the first thing I'll recommend is that you give yourself plenty of time and go slow. If something starts to go awry, take a break. Come back to it later. That'll really help you out. Now there's a lot of ways to approach this. I'm showing you just one, and the one I'm showing you is rather slow, but it teaches you some fundamentals and gets you on the right track in a pretty easy way. When you learn a little bit more, you might be more comfortable going a little faster and even trying out some other methods. Also remember, I'm going to be giving tips and tricks along the way, and that you can save this video to come back to later. I really recommend that. Finally, if you have any questions for me about this process, or you think you have techniques or tricks that work even better, put them in the comments below. I'm really always happy to learn more about these processes, and I'm certainly happy to answer your questions. So with that out of the way, let's get to splitting this bamboo. You're going to need some tools for this, of course. Since safety is always first, I recommend leather gloves and safety glasses. You'll also minimally need some type of splitting tool such as a bamboo froe or something similar. I'll drop a link in the description for a video about how to make an inexpensive bamboo froe. Whatever you do, please do not use good kitchen knives for this. You'll also need a wooden or rubber mallet, a pencil, and in part 2 you'll need either a 6 or 8-inch mill bastard file. You can probably get away with these things only, but for the method I'm demonstrating, I really recommend having some masking tape on hand, a small vise, and a flexible measuring tape or other measuring device. If you're working with a 12-foot culm, you can split the bamboo in the same way I'm showing you with 6-foot pieces, but you may want to start thinking about node spacing right away. I'm going to show you node spacing in a different video, so watch for that. Now, you're going to need plenty of space to do this, and it can get a little messy with the node diaphragms breaking, so I'm going to take this first part of the operation outside, but then I'm going to bring things inside for part 2 as we get the splits to the size that we need. If you are splitting 6-foot sections, I recommend starting with the butt half of the culm. Simply because if you're starting out, you might make some mistakes, and because you only need 6 strips out of this culm, you have some room to make those mistakes. Now, the butt half of my culm presents some challenges, so I'm actually going to show you how to split the tip section first, because, well, it's easier and it's more straightforward to show you what's going on. Then we can circle back and show you how I deal with those pains in the butt. You'll want to look your section over to see if there are splits you can use and or sections you want to avoid. Our tip portion has a perfect split already made through its entire length, either from drying or through a check split made by me or the bamboo supplier. Regardless, since this section is relatively clear of defects, I'm going to use that as part of my first split. Basically, I'm going to make my first split 180 degrees from the one that already is there, which will split the bamboo in perfect halves. If your bamboo doesn't already have a split in it, determine where you want to start. You'll still be splitting it in half, it will just take a little more effort. Working at the buttmost portion of the culm, make a pencil mark on the end of the bamboo where you want to make your split. You'll be holding the froe perfectly at that point and using the mallet to begin the split. It is important that you have some sort of backstop to hold the bamboo as you do this. Here, I'm using the space between the slats on my deck to hold it in place. Align the froe so it is perfectly perpendicular to the outside radius of the culm. Holding it steadily there, give a firm and accurate wrap to the back of the froe with your mallet. You don't need to go crazy here. Your goal is to get the split started and keep everything aligned as you do. Now, if you're a little bit nervous about that last part, you can give just a couple of light taps to score the bamboo a little bit and give that froe a nice place to rest. But when you actually go to do it, you're going to have to be pretty firm with smacking that fro into the bamboo. If things don't go right and the fro doesn't embed properly, that's okay. You can just realign it in the crack that you started and go again. Once the fro is embedded into the bamboo, you'll want to begin working it toward the other end. This is simply a process of twisting the fro alternately left or right until the split continues. You need pressure on the culm to achieve this, so if it isn't working, slide your fro further up the culm. If you find this to be too difficult or if the fro gets stuck, you can also keep kind of rapping on the fro with your mallet. I like the twisting method, but do what works best for you until you have the culm split into 2 halves. Easy. Next, we want to split those halves into thirds. To do this, it can be helpful to have a flexible measuring tape or at least some masking tape. Either way, some kind of tape's involved. Using the masking tape allows you to measure, make a calculation, mark the tape, and then use the tape as a guide for the split. You can use this to mark at parts further up the culm as well to make sure you're on track as you're doing the splitting. This is optional, but it's good for your first culm to help you visualize what is happening with your split. With the culm marked, you're going to use the same technique to start your split. You can continue the split either by twisting or wrapping the fro up the length of the culm until the bamboo is completely split. Alternatively, you can carefully and gradually pull the bamboo apart. If you didn't mark the culm, you can check your work with a rough measurement as you go. It is important to keep the split along that 1/3 line, but it shouldn't be too hard to do so at this stage. Now repeat this on the fatter portion of the piece, but because you already removed 1/3, you'll be splitting that remaining part in half, which will give you 3 even parts. Then you're going to repeat all of this for the other half of the tip section. Now this part shouldn't give you too much trouble unless you have a really cranky culm, and if your split does start to wander, it'll mean that you miss out on some strips. And if that does happen, the basic principle is going to be to apply more pressure and pull on the side where you want the split to go. I'll get into more of that in part 2. But for now, let's do the same thing to our butt section. When I selected our culm, I found an unusable area in the middle of the butt half. Ideally, I'll be able to split around this section and maximize the bamboo strips I can get out of it. But remember that for your first rod, you shouldn't stress out over this. You're really only going to need 6 good strips out of this section of bamboo. I'll need to pay a little bit of attention to where this is at, but for now, I'm going to focus on the splits that are already in the bamboo. Unfortunately, this section has 2 splits, one from each end. I'm electing to continue the split that starts at the butt. There's also a crack that appeared, which I didn't catch until I started the first split. I'm a little lucky with the placement of all these things. While I need to apply a little forethought and skill to my splitting, they won't affect me too much. After making my halving split, I pull apart the other pre-existing split. It isn't quite 1/3 of that half, so I'll have some unevenness on this one. That's okay. The other element I need to deal with is the big scar. If I can split right along the side of it, I'll lose the least amount of bamboo on that side and still get one more strip on the other. But can I do that accurately? Let's watch. At this point, you should have 6 tip sections and 6 butt sections. If you didn't have to work around anything, they should all be uniform widths. If you had to work around splits or damage, you might not have them quite so perfect, but they should all be close. Now take a break. That part was pretty easy, and I think it's a lot of fun. In part 2, we're going to come back, deal with those little node bumps and protrusions, and then we're going to get the strips we need for making our fly rod. I'll see you around the next bend, and until then, tight glue lines.